Good morning, everybody. If you're joining from around the region and the world, hello from Singapore. Welcome to this webinar titled Making Research on Motivation Accessible and Meaningful to Practitioners. This is part of a professional development webinar series that's organized by the Office of Education Research at the National Institute of Education in Singapore. My name is Pia-Rina Chung. I'm a research scientist at the Center for Research and Child Development at NIE, and I'll be one of your moderators today. Let me introduce my partner, Dr. Philip Towndrow, who will be the other moderator for today's session.
Good morning.
Phil, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, good morning. I'm a research scientist in the Office of Education Research at NIE. Good morning and welcome to everyone.
Thanks, Phil. We have a great lineup of speakers. Our four speakers will share their perspectives and work on applying motivation research in education. Before we start, I would like to go over a few housekeeping matters. Thank you for joining us today. It would be great if you guys can log your attendance using the QR code, and also or you can use the link that's posted in the chat. And if you would need a certificate of attendance, you can also indicate that on the attendance form. So while you guys spend about a minute to do that, I have a few more housekeeping matters. During the session, we welcome questions from you. And during the presentation or after the speaker's presentation, you can type your question in the Q&A box. You should see it on the right side of your screen. And if you experience any technical difficulties, you can use the chat function and we'll try to help you the best we can. This session will be recorded and we will share the recording of the session using through our social media channel. So just keep an eye on our Facebook or Twitter. We'll be sharing the recorded presentation afterwards. So please disable your mic and your video, and I think we can get started. So I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Tan Chung, who will be giving a short presentation on teachers' perspectives on applying motivation research. Mr. Tan Chung is a master teacher of educational support at the Academy of Singapore Teachers. In Singapore, we have a teaching track, and master teachers are national teacher leaders, and they're at the apex of the teaching track. They're mainly involved in working with teachers in their professional growth and development. They also do research and lesson demonstration. And the goal is to raise the professional competencies of teachers. Chung has supported many low progress learners, and he's also worked with teachers who support low progress learners. So he's very familiar with the challenges facing this group of students. He now supports teachers in finding ways to motivate and engage students who need educational support. And in addition to doing classroom research and supporting the learning communities of teachers, he also shares his work locally and internationally at conferences. So without further ado, let me welcome Mr. Tan Chung to start off today's webinar.
Yeah, so this morning I will share about what teachers, and also this is more my role now in the Ministry of Education as a master teacher, as a PD provider for teachers, how we think about motivation and also about research in motivation. And in general, when teachers come to workshops with us to attend the workshops, they want to know what works. They want to get tools and strategies of what they can try out in the classroom to help motivate the students, especially those in my area, which is the learner profile we term as low progress learners. And a handful of these teachers may also want to know about how to assess student motivation, how to measure them, how would they know if they are doing the right thing. And before discussing the two questions, we as PD providers like to pose this set of questions and let teachers talk among themselves. These questions are about their beliefs, about motivation, and also their experience in motivating students. Teachers mostly have a fairly good idea of what motivation is, and yet they are still coming to these workshops because they want to gather more ideas, especially those ideas that have worked for others, and learn from colleagues who are perhaps teaching a similar profile of students. These are some theories and models of motivation that teachers might be familiar with. At the top being the self-determination theory, which I suppose we will talk about quite a bit today. Through these, we can understand the various types of motivation and also the factors that affect the levels of motivation in the classroom with the students. But what's more important is for teachers to know the implications for practice. What do research and theories mean to us? How do we make sense of these theories and the researchers and translate these into actual thoughts and actions in the classroom? Now, teachers understand that a lack of motivation impedes learning and manifests itself in the form of disruptive behaviors in class, procrastination, or indifference. And these are counterproductive to learning. Unmotivated students will find the schooling experience disenchanting and learning a struggle. Typically, students are unmotivated due to two sources of influence, external or internal. Internal factors may, for example, include students' needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence not being met. Their mindsets about intelligence being innate and cannot be nurtured, their goal orientation, personal characteristics, and the way they perceive themselves. All this could affect their motivation to learn. The theories can explain students' learning needs and individual factors that affect students' motivation and implications on our teaching practice. External factors that motivate or demotivate students come from the learning environment. These include teachers' expectations and mindsets, which affect students' perceived self-efficacy, how safe they feel their learning environment is, which depends on how well teachers build teacher-student relationship and how teachers foster the peer support and relationship, and how teachers develop student-centered pedagogy. In other words, teachers are key to shaping this learning environment for students that can largely influence the students' level of motivation to learn. Teachers need to understand that motivation is not just one thing, and that the manifestation of behavior is an interaction between the environment and the individual. And this is probably the reason why some teaching actions or strategies may not always work out in a teacher's class as expected. It is also important to examine our belief about motivation. A teacher's belief will influence the instructional practice and how the students learn. Here in Singapore, our teaching fraternity believes that motivation is important because it fuels students' desire to learn and to embrace challenges. What we believe about motivation stems from the Singapore curriculum philosophy, which describes our educators' core beliefs about our students as learners and how we put them in the center of teaching and learning. Our beliefs impact our teaching practices and student learning. To make sense of the discussion and also to make the practice theory connection, as well as the practice belief connection, teachers have to reflect on their learning and experience and begin to plan for their interactions with the students. What do I do next? What would I want to try with my classes? Let me now mention three things that I usually bring up in the workshops that we conduct and when we discuss about researchers and theories. First things first, Research is based on what has happened, and what has happened is not going to be exactly the same as what's happening or what's going to happen. When teachers attend workshops, they often hear trainers say, when I did this, my students learned more than when I did that. Teachers may get the sense that in their classrooms, they should also do this and not that. At times, the researcher's advice might usefully translate directly from her lab to the classroom. But however, researchers more often help us by giving us new ways to think. If we teachers focus on the concepts underlying the researcher's suggested approach, we can apply them in our own way to our own classrooms and our own students. Number two, you are the only person teaching the students the curriculum in your school, and you are only you. A motivational phrase that fits your colleague just right might sound contrived or even insincere coming from you. Research-based guidance needs to fit in with our authentic teaching selves. And lastly, researchers usually report averages. And knowing this average benefits teachers. For example, because this strategy motivates students better on average than another strategy, we can adopt this strategy in our own teaching. At the same time, we must remember that averages apply to groups, not to specific people. Chi Seng or Margaret or Farhan in the class is not average. They are individual kids who may be quite different from the average. If you look at the graph, for example, the average is a line across, drawn across the different dots, but you hardly see one or two dots lying exactly on the line. So you know that the individual students is not there. So we need to adapt the theories and the practices that has been tried by others to our own classroom and students. Lastly, let me go back to where I started, which is what teachers want. Research informs practice. Teachers want evidence-based approaches and strategies which will help us in our work. I would suggest that research informs practice first through informing our understanding of the topic or the subject, because translating and putting research into a given context is sometimes not so easy. But research certainly helps us to have conversations about what works and what doesn't work in a particular context. Okay, that's all I have to share. Thanks, Farina.
Thank you, Chong, for the great presentation. I really like the principles that you brought up at the very end. And to me, it seems like a key message is to be flexible. So when researchers share their intervention work, it's not just like putting a recipe to each classroom and you follow these steps and that things will work magically, but instead is to teach them about the ingredients of the recipe so that teachers can flexibly use these elements that are important in the intervention in their own way. So teachers have some autonomy.
Yes, theories and researchers are important to teachers, especially teacher leaders who are helping other teachers become better teachers, because the theory will give us the why and the reasons behind why these practices are working and are useful. But we need to know that every individual student is not the same, and we cannot expect that whatever works for teacher A will work exactly in the same manner for teacher B. And then this is the reason why probably in the workshop we don't push out strategies. We go behind the strategies and explain why some works for some people and some may not. And teachers need to return to their classroom and process all this, because motivation is not just one thing. Motivation is also about the teacher's language, the time of the day. I would think it is quite situational, and it differs from student to student.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully during the Q&A today, we'll hear more about the strategies, how you introduce strategies in a way that is conducive to teaching, like allow teachers to use them flexibly. Thank you, Chong.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions for Chong, you can post them in the Q&A box, and we'll collate them, and we'll try to find common themes among the questions, and then post them to the speakers during the Q&A session. So now let's welcome our second speaker. It's my honor to welcome Professor John Wang. Professor Wang is the immediate past Dean of Graduate Studies and Professional Learning at NIE. He is a chartered psychologist and registered with the Health and Care Professions Council of UK as a sport and exercise psychologist. His main area of research is in motivation, integrating self-determination theory, achievement goal theory, and growth mindset. Professor Wang leads a group of NIE staff in the Motivation in Educational Research Lab at NIE. The aims of the lab are to focus on motivational issues related to education and to work on translating theories into knowledge or developing evidence-based practice in education. So let me welcome Professor Wang.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's my privilege to speak to you today on this webinar series on making research on motivation accessible and meaningful to practitioners. I'm from the Motivation in Educational Research Lab, or MER, in NIE, and I'm sharing with you the work done by MER Lab. So here I'm going to share with you how we actually disseminate research. And the main part is that I will also try and answer Mr. Tan's question, right? What works and how we provide resources for teachers to measure motivation. And at the end of my sharing, I will also talk about what are the contributions that we have made to teaching and learning, especially in the Singapore context. And finally, I'll share with you some of the lessons learned as a researcher in motivation. So you may want to take down this web page, right? The MER Lab was established officially in NIE in 2009. And at that time, the MER Lab was the only satellite lab of the Human Motivation Lab in Rochester. And the developer of self-determination theory, Professor Edward D.C. and Richard Ryan, they were our consultant for our lab. And the MER Lab was set up with a main purpose to focus on motivational issues in education. Our research is guided primarily by SDT, self-determination theory, but we also integrate it with other motivational theory, such as the achievement goal theory, implicit theories of mindset, and our aim is to translate research finding into practical guides for teachers and practitioners. So the MER Lab is led by myself and Associate Professor Liu Wen-Chia. She is the former Dean of the Office of Teacher Education and is advised by our former Director of NIE, Professor Tan Woon Seng. Now, the number of MER Lab International Advisory, right? We have a total of 13 renowned professors, right? That is being affiliated to us and advise us. We also have 7 other international faculties. And up to now, right, we actually have got 25 NIE faculty staff involved in the MER Lab. So far, right, the MER Lab has been awarded 40 research grants with a total of close to 5 million Sing dollar of funding. And we disseminate our research findings through our website. Okay, I mean, there's a low estimate of about 40,000 visitors have visited our website since 2009. Every month, we have about 500 visitors, and the visitors are mainly from Singapore. But we also have many visitors from all over the world, more than 50 countries, such as the USA, Australia, UK, and Korea. We also help in training and development of academics. For example, up to today, we have trained about 14 PhD students, and 7 research assistants has been developed into faculty staff. Right. We also have 2 former deans, 2 academic group heads, 2 deputy heads, 1 associate dean, 2 assistant deans, and 2 program heads in another universities. This is actually the visitors analytics for the MER Lab since October 2015. So if you take a look, right, at this red dot here, the biggest red dot is actually Singapore. So this is where Singapore, being called little red dot, has become the biggest dot. And we have got visitors from all over the world. In making our research accessible to practitioners, right, we produce publications such as books, journal articles, report brief for the teachers. We also work very closely with the Ministry of Education, such as in developing the Singapore Teacher Practice Framework and Professional Conversation Package for Singapore schools. In fact, the very first Professional Conversation Package was on motivation. And we also put up many recorded videos, newspaper reports, and conduct workshops and seminars, right, to disseminate our work. Okay, in our website, right, we basically provide a resource page for practitioners. They can access publications and reports, questionnaires for measuring motivation, and also the related construct, as well as the practical tips. So these practical tips, right, are mainly why so many visitors come for. They actually come in for the practical tips. So I'll elaborate a little bit more about what is in these practical tips. So in the practical tips, right, we actually provide mainly for three groups of people. One is for teachers in the classroom, one is for teachers in physical education, and one is for parents, okay? And in these practical tips, we actually translate research findings into classroom strategies for teachers by teachers, right? And the practical tips are basically, right, just a 1-2 pages of write-up with references. So this is one example of a practical tips. So we basically read up some research papers and then convert it into classroom strategies. It's very easy to read and implement in the classroom. And if the teachers want to find out more, right, they can actually go after the references to read up more. Okay, what are the contributions that we have made to teaching and learning in Singapore? The MERLab has contributed to the fact sheet and master document on motivation. I believe Singapore is the only country that has got a master document on motivation. And this is given to every teacher to guide them what is motivation and how they can actually motivate their students. We also contributed to the Joy of Learning policy for education. And the book that we have edited by Professor Liu, myself and Richard Ryan, right, titled Building Autonomous Learner, it has achieved 46,000 chapters download, and it was considered as the top 25% on the most downloaded ebook in 2017 and 2018. Okay, we also make sure that our key policy holders, right, are given a book, right, this book to read. Okay, and we also conduct regular key conferences and seminars, as well as work very closely with the practitioners in the MOE motivation network. Okay, so these are some of the fact sheet projects that we have conducted over the years. We started off looking at cognitive processes in project work, and subsequently we took on many other major projects. And right now, right, we are doing the latest project is creating a motivating school. Okay, I mean, this creating a motivating school, right, is to try and create a prototype school to understand how a whole school approach, right, can influence student teaching and learning. Okay, so if you're interested to find out some of these findings for our research, you can visit our website. There will be more reports and publications related to these projects. So I just want to share with you, right, what are the key learning points of doing motivational research in schools. I think many teachers, right, we have asked the wrong question, right? We always come for PD workshop, we ask this question: how can I motivate my student? What are the different ways we can actually motivate our students? I think this is the wrong questions to ask in the first place, right? We should take the perspective of asking the question, how can we create the condition in which my students can motivate themselves? Because all of you know that if the students are intrinsically motivated, right, they can create wonders. They can achieve a lot more compared to someone at their side trying to push them. So motivation of the teacher yourself, right, as a teacher, is actually more important than anything else. It can be influenced by the school policies, the school administration, your student achievement outcome, or your student needs, right? So sometimes we cannot just focus on the motivation of the students. We got to look at the motivation of the teachers as well. Are your psychological needs being satisfied in the first place? So we have to take care of our teachers first in order for the teachers to take care of the students. So that's why in this few years, right, we begin to focus on research a lot more on the teachers themselves and see how we can actually take care of the well-being and the motivational state of our teachers. Okay, finally, right, I just want to share with you, right, what are the challenges and how we can actually overcome these challenges. It is not easy for a researcher, right, to go into a school and try to conduct research and then take this research and publish on our own, right? Before we do any research, we got to understand the educational landscape and identify the needs of the school. Okay, that is a very, very important thing. Okay, we cannot do research that we want to do. We got to look at research that the school needs. Okay, so that is the first perspective of a researcher. We always take the needs of the school in our perspective and see what they need. Okay, so there's a need for us to conduct some need and assessment to understand what are the needs, what are the current trends of trend of education, and before we actually write out a proposal and try and do some research. Just for example, this creating a motivating school research, right? We only needed about 300 to 400 teachers to be involved in our first stage of the survey. But this project was so meaningful, right, that we have actually more than 1,000 teachers came on board and they wanted to be involved in this project. We only needed about 12 schools. In the end, right, we had 20 schools. And some of the schools, right, actually wanted all their teachers to be involved in the project as well. So this is just to give you a sense that if we conduct research that is required, that is needed by the school will come on board. Okay, another thing that we need to do as a researcher, right, is to level up the research literacy among the teachers. So we need to translate the research findings into something that is useful for the teachers. We also help the teachers to understand the theories. That is our role as a researcher as well. So after the data collection, we must always go back to the school and do our sharing. It would be very good for us to look back the research finding to practitioner by conducting more professional development courses, right? But at the end of the day, we also need to understand that being a teacher in a school, it is not easy. Every day they are faced with many challenges. We need to understand the challenges that are faced by these teachers and how we can actually contribute to help them resolve some of these challenges. Okay, so thank you very much for your kind attention. This is the end of my sharing.
Thank you, Professor Wang, for the very inspiring presentation and for giving us a snapshot of what Merle has been doing, all the great work that Merle has been doing. So I actually see a kind of common theme between your presentation and Cherchong's presentation already that, when Cherchong talks about the interaction between student and environment being very important, that's something that you talk about too. And it's not just focusing on student motivation, but actually we need to kind of take a step back and look broader and look at the environment, providing the right conditions for teachers so that they can motivate themselves to help students. So is this kind of the philosophy behind the whole school approach for your project?
Okay, for the creating a motivating school, right? We understand that being a teacher, right? We have many things that can influence them, their own motivation. We have got factors that is from above. So we need to look at the school leadership, their head of departments, what the school or the policies actually require them to do. The second layer of things are factors that are within the teachers. So for example, their workload, their prior experience, their own belief system, etc. Their work, a lot of things that they are facing the teachers within themselves. And the other factors are factors below, right? So it's the student, right? The characteristics of the students, the belief of the students, the motivation of the students. So we need to understand all these three factors, above, within, and below, so that we can actually help the teachers to function well in the school. So this is what the project is about.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you just focus on one particular level,
Yeah.
It won't work as well as focusing on all three of these. It looks like a tiered approach that that your project is taking on.
Yes.
Thank you. So like I said before, if you have any questions for Professor Wang, you can use the Q&A box. We'll collate them and post them to the speakers during the Q&A session. Thank you, Professor Wang.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, John and Purina. It's now my turn to introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Betsy Ng. She obtained her PhD from the Nanyang Technological University here in Singapore, and she's a researcher and lecturer in the Office of Education Research at NIE. She's actively involved in research and has been doing so since 2009. To date, she's written more than 40 peer-reviewed articles and conference paper presentations. She has extensive working experience as an education specialist, polytechnic lecturer, science educator, and educator in a range of educational settings. She's also a member of the editorial board for international journals, such as the Cambridge Journal of Education. Her areas of expertise include motivation and lifelong learning. She's the lead editor of a book focused on self-determination theory that is due to be published at the end of this year. So, Betsy, it's over to you.
Thanks, Phil. Good morning, everyone. I just need to share my screen. All right. Hi, good morning, everyone. Just a kind of a quick review based on some of the ideas that I actually obtained from my research and try to make it across to all of you in a very simple way. So without further ado, I just kind of give you an overview of what motivation is about. And I guess you have heard from the two speakers. I will not elaborate more because for my area is mainly looking at how to actually create, similarly to Prof. Wong, how to create a good environment to actually support learners, as well as we adults are also learners, to motivate ourselves in terms of your daily, it can be daily application as well as you as a parent. I guess there are some parents in the audience, how to actually motivate your kids in this case. So this is a snapshot of what motivation is about. What is motivation? So from the earlier two speakers, you already have heard motivation is actually the drive. What motivates us as an adult learner? What is it that you're actually trying to achieve at the end of the day? And there's a goal orientation theory. And also you mentioned, it was mentioned by the two speakers about mindset, how to actually motivate your students to grow their mindsets. Okay, so I just kind of put it in a very simple term in terms of what is motivation to my perspective. Of course, the earlier speaker also mentioned that motivation is not just as simple as it is. So motivation encompasses many aspects, like for instance, whether you are curiosity, interest, the flow, whether you have the flow to actually do your tasks, as well as emotions. Motivation is also about emotions because there are a lot of times when you enjoy doing something, that is actually intrinsic motivation that was mentioned earlier. So I just want to share with you one very interesting journey and experience that I had last year before the COVID situation came in. I'm not sure how many of you actually have gone to this Singapore learning journey. If you have, you can have a show of hands. And just a quick test to ask the audience, which DNA trait? I mean, I put it in an inverted form because it's not exactly DNA trait, but if you have been to the learning journey that was held in last year in Fort Canning, I went around I think I went around November period. So I actually captured this. Yeah, I saw some audience raise their hand. So how many of you feel that it is the key Singapore when they actually rated is openness? Any one of you? Or multiculturalism or self-determination? I guess I just give you a definition of the self-determination that I came across when I went to this learning journey in Fort Canning. So this is actually the photos I took when I went there. I do see quite a number of hands raised. Thanks for your participation. So in the context of Singaporeans, I have to stress that this is based on the given context when I was there last year. Self-determination, it was defined in the face of disruption, individuals, communities, and eventually our nation has risen to determine our destiny. This is Singaporean context of self-determination. So what do you think, or which of this DNA trait is actually being rated the most? Oh, I think there are some responses. Okay, I do not want to take up too much of time, so I just kind of like connect this to the next slide. You can actually see from the responses, because I was there, I think I was the last group to actually attend this particular learning journey, because they have a time slot and I was in the last time slot, or maybe second last. It was actually in the evening time, and you can actually look at it that out of these 3 DNA traits per se, actually self-determination was rated or was voted the highest. So what does that mean about self-determination? Although there is the definition in this context, of course, defined in the Singaporean context, they may perceive self-determination slightly different. But in general, self-determination actually, if you look in the psychological context, is like looking at the 3 different needs, which I will not go through because I think it will be too dry if I actually explain everything. But in general, when you are self-determined, you have these 3 basic needs being fulfilled, and that actually lead to intrinsic motivation. However, we know that in the current situation, how many of us or how many of your kids actually have intrinsic motivation? In fact, most of us have extrinsic motivation. So what does that imply? It doesn't mean that if your kid or you yourself is extrinsically motivated, it's a bad thing, because there is a spectrum of external motivation, or we call it external regulation, which actually you can look at this simple illustration. Very simplistically, I kind of just bring this illustration across so you can understand. And based on my research, which was my PhD study, in fact, the secondary school students, they actually are mainly in this somewhat external. Because if you notice, okay, I just have a quick statistic overview that when I did this research, it was 12 secondary schools across Singapore. And most of them, when you look at the profile, they fall actually in between this 2, external and internal. And I mean, majority are in this case because they do it because they are being forced to do it. Like homework, I have to do it. If not, I get punished. I have to score full marks for an exam because my parents bring me to overseas holiday, etc., etc. So these are the things that fall under I should pass so that I can get what I want to. I should do my homework to please my teacher. So this is an example that show in the Singapore context, I guess we are quite externally motivated because we do things for a reason, we do things for a purpose, which is not internal. Okay, I just have a quick sharing, as I mentioned earlier on, about the motivation research that actually I have done. So I have done intrinsic motivation research in terms of secondary school students. That was part of my PhD study. I also have looked into the mastery approach, which I mentioned. Motivation is also about orientation. And if you are more of a mastery approach person, you would actually learn because you want to. It's an authentic learning. You learn because you want to obtain the knowledge and actually how to apply later on. And of course, I did some, I think about 3 years back, I actually did a research on NTU University students in terms of growth mindset. And it was a very simple, short control versus intervention study where students with growth mindset, they actually attain a better outcome at the end. So these are just a step. These are examples of kind of like a snapshot of what I have been doing or what I have done. And I kind of like just summarized based on my research and experience that there are some, I mean, there are so many motivational strategies, and I do agree with the first speaker that's saying strategies, you have to look behind. It's true. So example, like social emotional learning, you have to look behind the students because it's the emotions that actually drive them. When they enjoy doing something, they will be inherently or intrinsically motivated. And I guess in the current context, if you look at MOE framework, they actually so much focus into SEL nowadays. Plus, we actually have to have empathy, compassion, things like that come in actually. This helps in terms of driving one's attitude, driving one's behavior, because motivation is not just something that is easily measurable in terms of like you mentioned, some of you probably have some questions like how to assess motivation. A lot of times you have to look based on students' behavior. You can see in terms of how they enjoy learning. For instance, an experiential learning task, you actually can see their body language. They are happy. You see, this is called emotion as well. And if you provide a good task, which is autonomy supportive, being the teacher, provide the agency for the students to actually have a chance to voice their views. Or you as a teacher, you should also be giving autonomy supportive feedback so that you help your students to improve. It's the same context when you are a parent, because in an autonomy supportive environment, you actually allow your kids to grow. So it's not something that you just being a parent, because I'm a parent, you have to be dictative and you have to listen to me. You have to give certain, some space, I would say some learning space, pace of learning, because even we adults, when we are forced to do something, we definitely would feel there is this control environment, and you probably it's not a sustaining motivation. Therefore, it's kind of like extrinsic motivation. And so at the end, whether you can use the spectrum that the slide show you from external motivation to slowly drive the students to become intrinsically motivated. And this whole thing is actually a spectrum, because it can be done when you actually provide the right nutrients, like what Prof. Wong mentioned about giving the right nutrients to them, but it has to take time. So you can't just expect things to happen overnight. So these are just a few key things to highlight in terms of motivation-related strategies. And of course, there are challenges. I mean, I have not had a chance to look at the Q&A, but I guess in the midst of audience, you probably have a lot of questions like, oh, these are just strategies that you think you will apply and it will help students. But is it successful? Does it work? So a lot of times it's about beliefs. And the previous speaker also mentioned that the belief system is something that is important, students' attitude, and most important is the mindset. Whether they have the mindset, like for instance, the motivating school, like for instance, whether the teachers have the mindset to accept what you are actually doing as a research. And like what Prof. Wang actually said, it was very motivating because he didn't expect so many participants to actually come on board. And that means that the teacher's mindset, they are receptive towards what you are actually doing as a researcher. So I think the challenges here is not something that you can actually resolve overnight as well. It takes time because a belief system is built upon your value system. And of course, your values is actually being built over based on your past experience, etc. However, I feel if you have the right mindset and you're able to have the mindset shift, why not? And then that actually will help in terms of getting yourself being motivated. You have the attitude, the right attitude as well to actually act on it. So at the end of the day is whether you act on it, because if you just say no action, that's as good as you are not helping yourself to make the change. So I feel that all goes at a very abstract level, which I can't go on and on because it can actually be a topic that can have a very long debate. But I just want to highlight these are the 3 key challenges. Okay, so another thing to kind of like end my slide, because of motivation, a lot of times you think that how to actually get yourself to be motivated. I think most important is you have to learn to evolve. Like in the current context now, we are still in the COVID pandemic era, it's like in between and also post-pandemic era. Are you the kind who actually give chance to evolve? So you actually learn, you have been learning, and then you try to unlearn, and then you relearn. So one thing that I just want to, I'm not sure that I have time, but just a quick sharing is, how many of you actually are able to go through this? Because a lot of times you feel, I learned something. It's very hard. It's very hard to unlearn. So it's actually muscles memory that has been stored inside you, and you find that, oh my goodness, it's so hard to unlearn. I just share with you a very recent example in my own context. I haven't been driving for more than 1 year. And of course, my driving license is from a manual car. So I used to drive a manual car, but for more than, I think, almost 2 years, I haven't been driving. And recently, I got the chance to drive an automatic car. And that's, of course, my brother's car. It was my first time, and he actually allowed me to drive from home to NIE. So I have to remind myself, oh no, I had never driven an automatic car, how to drive. But of course, my roads, very simple. It's like a toy car. I just step on the accelerator and the brake. It's just 2 pedals. There's no clutch. So I think it's something that you have to remind yourself, okay, my left leg is not stepping on any clutch because there's no clutch. Then I just have to rest my left leg on the left side of the, as you know how a car looks like. So I just have to rest the left leg, don't move, self-tell myself. So throughout the journey, I was quite careful driving an automatic car, and I made my way to and fro for NIE and back home. So that was a very simple story, but it's a real experience. You just have to self-talk, remind yourself, you can do it. So that is something which I thought it would be more relevant to the audience, where you have to be able to learn to unlearn, unlearn to learn. It's possible, okay? All right, I will not be going through every of this because it's on the slides, you can actually read from here. But these are some of the implications that is applicable, whether you are a parent, you're a teacher, or you yourself as a learner. So you have to find meaning, because when you find meaning in doing something, there's intrinsic motivation. Okay, and of course, what is autonomy supportive, which Professor Reeve would elaborate on that, so I will not be taking up too much of his time. All right, the key takeaway message for my talk. Okay, 3M is important. Can I just have some responses? What do you think 3M is? I tried to look at I'm not sure if I can see though. Anyone? I don't know whether I can see the responses. Anyone know what is the what 3M is? Okay, I can look at the chat. All right, I think it's interesting responses. One of you mentioned the 3M is motivation, management, meaning you're 1/3 correct. And of course, most of you mentioned motivation. So one of the M is motivation. What about the other 2? I think one applicant is very, very humorous. Mentioned about money making, money meaning. Mindset, yes, the second word came out, mindset. One more M. Let's see. So motivation, mindset. Oh, interesting. Someone mentioned mastery. Oh, well, mastery is part of motivation, right? Because I mentioned motivation is about drive, mastery, etc. That encompasses everything. Oh, interesting, memorable. It's not really memorable. Mindfulness, I would like to include there, but that will open up to a room of debate. Okay, last try. Anyone else? I guess the third word is hard to guess. All right, so I shall reveal the answer. Okay. Yep, mindset, you got it, motivation and momentum. Why is that so? Because when you have these three elements, basically, if you know what is momentum, it's a force. Like I mentioned earlier on, you don't just talk about it. You don't just speak about it. You have to act on it. There's momentum. There's a force to action. So a lot of times we just only say we will do something, but how many times you actually really going to do something that you like? If you are given the choice, you're given the opportunity, you're given the time, why not try something new? That is part of creativity. That is part of motivation as well. So this is something that I would like to share with you. 3M is important. And of course, I'll end my talk with this quote. Don't limit your challenges, challenge your limits. Yep, thank you everyone. So I will stop sharing for now.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. In the interests of time, I think we'll move directly to the final speaker, and then perhaps we can come back to you in the panel discussion. There are several questions that have come in during your presentation, and we'll try and cover those issues then. So if that's fine with you, we'll move directly now to Professor Reeve. So our final speaker for this morning is Professor John Marshall Reeve. He received his PhD in experimental psychology from Texas Christian University in the United States and completed postdoctoral research on human motivation at the University of Rochester. Professor Reeve's research interests include the empirical study of human motivation and emotion, with emphasis on teachers' motivating styles, students' engagement in learning activities, and the neuroscience of intrinsic motivation. He's received several awards to recognize how this research has been used successfully to enhance educational practice. Professor Reeve was past editor-in-chief of the Journal of Motivation and Emotion from 2011 to 2017 and past chair for the Motivation in Education Special Interest Group, which is part of the American Educational Research Association. So it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Reeve to you all.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. And I'd just like to say thanks for everyone attending online in this unusual age. I really appreciate it. I want to thank Office of Education Research and NIE because I'm coming to you today from Australia, down under. I just want to say anytime I have a chance to interact with the professionals in Singapore, I consider it a privilege. I've been around the world seeing classrooms, and nowhere in the world do teachers take professional development more seriously than they do in Singapore. So I really appreciate the chance to be associated with not only Singapore, but all the countries around Singapore. I would like to talk about what my classroom observations and empirical research have taught me to be the single most important classroom phenomena there is, and that's the teacher's motivating style. And what we do in our research is we work really hard with teachers to help them upgrade the quality of their motivating style. And what we mean by that is helping teachers become more autonomy supportive towards students during instruction, and less controlling. So next slide. This slide's a little complicated, but I'd like you to mostly just focus on the red bold-faced text. So like teachers, we reflect and struggle with this question of how can we promote students thriving, students' positive educational outcomes, their classroom performance, their achievement, their skills, writing skills, artistic skills, and talents. How can we promote these? Where should we focus our efforts? And there's lots of opportunities to focus your attention on what to do about promoting achievement and skill development. You could focus directly on the achievement. You could focus on students' engagement. You could focus on intervening in students' motivation. But what my experience has taught me, the most profitable thing to do is actually not to focus on the students, to focus on the teachers or the classroom context. Like Professor Wang said, I thought this was a perfect summary, is what we're trying to do is create the conditions under which students can motivate themselves. And the people who create those conditions are the teachers. And in particular, it's the teacher's classroom motivating style that creates conditions under which students thrive or flounder or suffer. So we start with the assumption that students have plenty of motivation. Our previous speakers talked about all types of motivation: intrinsic motivation, psychological needs, curiosity, interest, competence. Students have, internalizations. Students have plenty of motivation. And what they most need from teachers is support for the motivation that they naturally have. So that's our basic guiding principles. How can we support, encourage, enable, vitalize students' motivation so that students can motivate themselves, engage themselves, and achieve and develop skills and talents? So what we do, if you look in the bottom left of the slide, little blue text down there, we develop intensive, evidence-based, very practical workshops that we try to help teachers develop their motivating style. I want to tell you a little bit about what we do, give you a feel for that, so you can understand how we spend our time working with groups of teachers or one-on-one with teachers, and what we mean by becoming more autonomy supportive. Okay, next slide. So on the left of this slide is what we emphasize. This is the heart and soul. When we say autonomy supportive teaching, what are we talking about? That's on the left. And then the actual workshop, I don't know if I have time to talk about it today. I'll go through it real fast. Over on the right is it's an 8-hour kind of workshop that I'll try to overview real quickly. But mostly I'd like you to pay attention for the moment to the left slot. And in particular, the essential skills. When I say motivating styles, probably the most important single classroom phenomena there is. The three essentials of what teachers can do to have a high quality motivating style are in the red type, the red text. And that's developing the skill of perspective taking, empathy, perspective taking, and then developing the skill to support or vitalize students' intrinsic motivation, to give students a learning activity and to give them the spark of intrinsic motivation. How do you do that? And then the third essential skill is to present a learning activity and promote students' volitional internalization, where they willingly want to do an activity. So well, okay, fine. How do you do that? How do you take the student's perspective, support intrinsic motivation, and support internalizations? How do you do that? So let me go to the black text and take them one by one, quickly, but one by one. How do you get yourself ready? How do you get yourself in the mindset of perspective taking? So we encourage during these workshops First, we encourage teachers to take a basic attitude, basic student-focused attitude. That doesn't mean giving up your own perspective. And the lesson plan's important. Keep your eye on the clock, the requirements of the day, the learning objectives. These are all important, and the teacher should focus on those. But make enough room, in fact, a lot of room in your thinking and your preparation to focus on the student. What do students want? What do they prefer to do? How are they receiving the instruction? Are they interested? Are they learning? Do they value this material? If I were the student, what would I be, if I'm sitting in the class, what would I be thinking right now? And just to always have the two perspectives in your head, your own perspective, but also see your class and the learning experiences from the student's point of view. And then on the right, we have the interpersonal tone of understanding. And this is communicating to students. What I'm doing here in the classroom is I'm trying to understand you. I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm just trying to understand you. What do you want? What do you prefer? I want you to know that I'm on your side. I'm your ally. I'm here to help you understand this material and find it interesting. So if you take this student-focused attitude, you adopt this and you communicate through your voice tone and everything else, this interpersonal tone of understanding, then you're ready. It's almost easy to take students' perspective. And we think that taking students' perspective is the starting point, the critical starting point for autonomy supportive teaching. And then once you're thinking about students, you're giving out a learning activity or a objective for the day, you're thinking about students, how they react and what they want. And then you go to the task of supporting their interest or their intrinsic motivation, or supporting their internalization or the valuing of the activity or the requirement or the standard of excellence or whatever it is. So how do you support, okay, fine. How do you support intrinsic motivation? So if you see the blue ASIB, sorry about the abbreviations, ASIB means autonomy supportive instructional behavior. And there are 7 of these, and these are the specific skills, instructional skills, the acts of instruction that we spend a lot of time with teachers. These are our recommended approaches to instruction. And this is what we work on so much in the workshop. So over here on instructional behavior number 2, this is developing the skill, especially at the first of a learning activity or development of a lesson plan, is to invite students to pursue their personal interest. Now, how do you do that? It's very simple, but it's almost never done in a classroom. I've observed literally thousands of classrooms, and teachers just don't do this. It's like saying, what are you interested in? Or today we're going to talk about the solar system. What do you find interesting about the solar system? Or we're going to read the literature of Roald Dahl. What's interesting to you about Roald Dahl or this website that's on the board? And then when students express their interest, support it and take the lesson in the direction of their interest. The other, and again, it's very easy to do, but it takes the flexibility, it's the willingness to have students both express their interest and then to go take the lesson, bend the lesson towards those interests and the satisfaction of those interests. And then present learning activities in need-satisfying ways. I think that our previous 2 speakers spoke to that really well about competence and relatedness and autonomy through choice, through optimal challenge, guidance, scaffolding, etc. So this is how you present a learning activity and catalyze interest or need satisfaction during that activity. Now, of course, a lot more needs to be said on that, but let me just introduce them for now. So let me take you over on the right side, support internalization. I'll try to go through it quickly. What's this skill? This is more complicated. It takes all 4 of these behaviors together to have a student who says, this task isn't interesting, or it's not important, it's not valuable, I don't really want to do this. So to help students find meaning or value or importance in an activity, we recommend that first teachers provide an explanatory rationale, the reason this activity is so important, how it's useful to you and then explain the utility of the activity. Acknowledge negative feelings. I understand this is difficult. I understand it. Like, you see this task is boring or overwhelming. I understand that. A lot of students feel this way, but you acknowledge and you accept the negative feelings, that how students feel when they don't want to do an activity like homework or something. It's potentially a valid reaction to an uninteresting task. And then number 6 is rely on invitational language. Instead of pressuring students, which we think is motivationally a disastrous thing to do, like forcing and pressuring and students into compliance, is saying, you might find this interesting, you may want to do this. It's when you're ready. It's invitational language to encourage students to begin when they're ready. And the last one is display patience. And this is a calm, optimistic kind of waiting and just knowing that students can regulate their behaviors on their own and do so quite effectively. So you give them the time and the space to change their behavior or overcome inertia or to revise their skills and things like this. Okay, over on the right side, so that's literally the how-to or the what that we teach. And on the right side is the workshop experience. The first part, we introduce everything, and this is generally a 3-hour morning workshop that looks like it starts with a PowerPoint. It's a lot of information. And then we take a lunch break and we go to what's really important is part 2. It's after lunch, we have a 3-hour afternoon workshop. And this is what teachers most like and benefit and say, boy, I really learned something today. So we spend all the time, we show a lot of videos, expert modeling, a lot of guidance, a lot of deliberate practice, if that phrase is okay, on the how-to of autonomy supportive instruction. So we get in small groups and we practice, and after watching the modeled on the videos, then you try to give explanatory rationales. You practice acknowledging, accepting negative feelings, inviting students to pursue their personal interest, etc. You actually develop the skill. And we think this is very skilled instruction. And we treat it as seriously as an athlete or a musician treats their skill developments. So we spend a lot of times with practice. And we also encourage and help students make this transition, sorry about the abbreviations, but learn how to replace CIB, controlling instructional behaviors, with alternative autonomy supportive instructional behaviors. So instead of giving a directive, provide an explanatory rationale. Instead of offering students an incentive, invite them to pursue their personal interest. Instead of pressuring students with your hard language, use invitational language, etc. Then the last part is part 3, which doesn't occur until about 1 month into the semester or the term, after teachers had practice with autonomy supportive instruction in their own classroom. And this is a teacher-led group discussion. Okay, hopefully that makes some sense about what we do. Now, I would like to, like Betsy was doing, I'd like you to reflect for a little bit. Here's a typical problem just about all teachers face, and it's a difficult problem. That's why I used it. What would you do? How would you solve this problem if this was in your classroom, either as a teacher or perhaps as a parent on homework? So the students procrastinating, a lot of inertia, doesn't really find the activity interesting, little motivation, little initiatives like revising the paper or starting their homework or practicing a skill. They can't get into it. What would you recommend? So take 30 seconds or so. What would you do? Well, hopefully just whatever the first thing that comes to your mind, I think it's very interesting. But while you're thinking about that, my warning is most teachers, most parents certainly, tend to take charge. They say, okay, we got a problem here. And they intervene with the student and they try to solve the problem for the student or force the student into solving the problem to make the procrastination go away. So we think that's exactly the wrong thing to do, even though it's the most common or prototypical or expected thing to do. We think it's motivationally disastrous thing to do. So with that preface, let me show you what we would recommend, and you can see whether you agree or disagree with it. So here's a difficult problem, students unable to motivate themselves. So how do you do what Professor Wang recommended? To create the conditions under which students can motivate themselves. And it looks like students can't motivate themselves. What do you do? So that's why I said it's a difficult, very skillful thing for teachers to do. So we would recommend start always by taking the student's perspective. And it might sound like, if you let me imagine I'm talking with a student, how do you feel about this assignment? It looks like you're having trouble. How do you feel about it? And what I want to know as the teacher, what's the problem? Is it a lack of interest? You know, is it a lack of intrinsic motivation? Is it a lack of value? The student doesn't think the task is important or a worthwhile way to spend time. So that's a problem of internalization, or maybe it's some other issue. But before you intervene or work with the student, first understand why the student's having trouble. And in this example, it's probably the student will say, it's just not important. I don't know if they'll actually say that, but they'll think that. So it's probably an internalization problem, although it might be interest, or it might be like, I just don't have the equipment, or who knows what the student will say. But that's the point. You're not ready to try to support this student's motivation until you feel like you really understand what the problem is. And then something that's very difficult but very skillful, I would first recommend acknowledge and accept the negative affect. Yes, I understand. You don't see this as important or necessary. Or even, I imagine many people feel this way, and sometimes I feel that way myself. So you can hear some empathy, you can hear some validation. This is what we mean by understanding or taking the student's perspective. I understand. I want to work with you to help you help if we can solve this difficult problem. And then the next step would be to explain to the student. The student, let's say they don't think it's a necessary activity. So let me explain why, I've given you this assignment to revise your paper or do your homework. Let me explain why I think it's important, why I think it's valuable, why I think it's worth your time. An example of a rationale, this is actually an intrinsic goal, is let's see if you can improve, even by 1%, your writing, your topic sentence. Just make it a little bit better, because the goal is to get better and better. We want to improve your writing. And I think you'll be surprised, this is an invitational language, after you revise your topic sentence, spend 5 minutes on it, how much better your second draft is than your first draft. And here the student can start to, if they do make progress and you're there to provide the modeling and the guidance to help them make progress on revising their topic sentence, then they can say, well, that was worth 5 minutes, because this is a better sentence. And I feel a little bit competent now as a writer because I made progress, I improved, and you're starting to develop some competence, you're starting to develop some valuing that maybe it is worth investing in revising my paper. So you can get the sense of the student always feels that the teacher's on their side, that's there to support and understand and create the conditions under which the student can motivate themselves through competence, valuing, things like this. Okay. Next slide. Let me just, I'm probably running out of time. Let me just go through the last 3 slides. because I think we need evidence that what we're recommending is highly effective. I say it represents highly skillful instruction, highly skilled motivating style. So this is maybe a complicated slide, but you can see on the right, this is just all the dependent measures that we've used in our studies, in which we randomly assign half of the teachers to participate in our workshop and half of the teachers in a control group, a waitlist control group. So we use random assignment, and then we ask students to fill out questionnaires, or we make classroom observations. And the dependent measures like need satisfaction and classroom engagement, conceptual learning, academic achievement, and positive self-concept, and pro-social behavior, and less bullying, and on down the list. So on the left side, you've got a graphical representation of our results. So the red line are the mean scores, the students of the teachers in the control group. And the blue line is what we're most interested in. These are the mean scores of the students who have teachers who participated in the workshop. And what you'll see on all our dependent measures, the blue line is greater than the red line if it's a positive outcome, like need satisfaction or engagement. And the blue line is lower than the red line if it's a maladaptive educational outcome, like need frustration or bullying. So we're able to get the bullying and the antisocial behavior and the need frustration out of the class, out of the students, and we're able to get the need satisfaction, the engagement, and the learning into the students. So these are student outcomes. And I just show this to show that what we recommend is effective in motivating students to produce positive educational outcomes. Now, the next slide are teacher benefits. And these are lots of benefits, but you can see on the right, we've included these dependent measures in our experiments. So I'll go on the left. This is just like a manipulation check for autonomy, supportive teaching, and controlling. Teachers are able to upgrade their motivating style. They become more autonomy, supportive, less controlling. Those are the blue lines. But lots of other very important outcomes. I think teaching efficacy is tremendously important. You go into the class and you say, I've got what it takes. I've got the strategies and the skill and the knowledge to engage my students in learning activities, to promote students' learning and achievement, and manage the classroom behavior. I know how to do that. I've got the skill to do that. And then job satisfaction and lots of other dependent measures, passion and lesser exhaustion, etc. But just the point of this slide is all the graphs look the same. Teachers benefit as much as their students do. So if you can upgrade your motivating style, you enjoy your job more, you feel more efficacious. You have, the teachers have a transformational experience the same way that the students do. One more slide. And that is to get us to a question and answering. We really recommend, we spend all our time in the workshop on the blue box on the top. We think what really helps teachers to promote not only their own benefits, but their students' benefit is develop the skill how to support intrinsic motivation during learning activities, and how to support students' internalizations of external regulations like rules and goals and assignments and skill development and things like this. But teachers, when they begin the workshop, say, that's nice, but that's kind of a luxury. What we want to know is the red type. Spend time helping us learn how to provide structure. And then you got lots of examples of what structure is. And then on the right side, intrinsic motivation is nice, but what we really want are these very difficult to solve problems that we haven't been able to solve ourselves. Our students are falling asleep in class, disengagement. They're performing woefully, dramatic underachievement. The papers they hand in are terrible, or there's serious behavioral misconduct like bullying and cheating and things like this. Help us solve these problems. And we do. We spend a lot of time on this, but I would just say as a way to conclude that what you see in the red type are symptoms. They're symptoms that you're not doing the blue type. If you go into a classroom and you're able to create a classroom full of intrinsic motivation and internalization of the teacher's requirements and the educational standards, you won't have motivational problems. If the students are interested and they value the learning activities, you'll just be surprised that all the motivational problems and a lot of the behavioral problems fall by the wayside. And all of a sudden, structure doesn't become so important. It is important, and we recommend learning how to provide structure in an autonomy supportive way. But certainly those problems on the right become less, because students who's really interested in won't be falling asleep in class. Students who really values developing a skill in art or PE, they won't perform poorly. They'll make progress, etc. So I hope that's some food for thought for a Q&A. And I think that's where I'll end.